August 15, 1943, 5:30 in the morning, Benghazi Airfield, Libya. The desert air shimmered with heat that had never left the sand, and the sound of 178 Pratt & Whitney R1830 twin Wasp engines created a symphony of American industrial might that could be heard 20 miles away. Inside the cockpit of the B-24J Liberator, christened Exterminator, Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker adjusted his oxygen mask and studied the navigation charts spread across his lap. The target lay 1,800 miles to the northeast, Ploiești, Romania, Hitler's most vital oil refinery, the lifeline of the Third Reich's war machine. The morning briefing had been blunt. Of the 178 B-24 Liberators preparing for takeoff, statistical projections suggested that fewer than half would return. The mission planners at 9th Air Force Headquarters had calculated acceptable losses at 40%. What they had not calculated was the psychological impact of watching American heavy bombers emerge from assembly lines in Willow Run, Michigan, faster than the Luftwaffe could shoot them down. Each aircraft rolling off the production floor represented something the German High Command had failed to comprehend: industrial democracy unleashed. Baker's Liberator carried the standard combat load, 8,000 pounds of 500-pound general-purpose bombs nested in the forward and aft bomb bays. 50-caliber machine guns protruded from 10 positions around the aircraft's aluminum fuselage. The fuel tanks held 2,700 gallons of 100-octane aviation gasoline, enough for a round trip to Romania, with 30 minutes of combat reserves. The gross weight pushed 65,000 pounds, 15,000 pounds heavier than the aircraft's original design specifications. It was a testament to American engineering that the B-24 could carry such loads and still achieve formation flying speeds of 190 miles per hour. The meteorological briefing had warned of thunderstorms over the Balkans and fighter concentrations around Belgrade. Intelligence estimates placed 200 Luftwaffe interceptors within striking distance of the target area, including veteran pilots from Jagdgeschwader 27 and elements of the Romanian Air Force flying German-built Messerschmitt Bf-109G. The Ploiești refineries themselves bristled with over 200 heavy anti-aircraft guns, ranging from deadly 80mm flak 36 cannons to rapid-fire 37mm installations, positioned in concentric rings around the most vital production facilities. What the German defenders did not know was that American industrial capacity had already decided the outcome of this war. While Luftwaffe pilots nursed aging fighters and rationed fuel, the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant produced one complete B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. General Motors contributed engines. Consolidated Aircraft provided engineering expertise. Across America, from Seattle to Savannah, the arsenal of democracy operated around the clock, turning raw materials into air power with mechanical precision that defied German comprehension. The German High Command had received intelligence reports about American production figures. Most dismissed them as propaganda. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring himself had declared American claims physically impossible during a staff meeting in Berlin. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht estimated that American industry might achieve monthly production rates of 200 heavy bombers by late 1943. The actual figure was approaching 700 per month, with projections reaching 1,000 by early 1940. This mathematical reality would prove more decisive than any tactical innovation or strategic doctrine. German military intelligence had intercepted communications between American aviation manufacturers and the Army Air Forces. Luftwaffe analysts noted references to assembly line techniques and interchangeable parts, concepts they dismissed as inferior to traditional German craftsmanship. The notion that aircraft could be mass-produced like automobiles violated their understanding of aerospace engineering. Each German aircraft was essentially handcrafted by skilled artisans who took pride in individual workmanship. The Americans had chosen quantity over quality, or so the German assessment concluded. This fundamental misunderstanding would prove catastrophic. The B-24 Liberator, derided by German pilots as the flying boxcar or the pregnant cow, embodied American industrial philosophy. It was not elegant like the British Lancaster or technologically sophisticated like German experimental aircraft. It was functional, reliable, and above all, mass-producible. Every component had been designed for ease of manufacture and maintenance. The aircraft could be assembled by semi-skilled workers using standardized tools and procedures. This approach enabled production volumes that German industry, dependent on craft traditions and limited raw materials, could never match. Lieutenant Colonel Baker's formation represented just one day's production from American factories. By August 1943, The United States was producing more heavy bombers in a month than Germany had built in the entire war. This industrial supremacy would manifest itself in ways the German high command could not anticipate. Where Luftwaffe pilots saw individual aircraft to be shot down, American planners saw expendable assets in an equation of attrition that heavily favored the United States. The psychological dimension of this industrial warfare was equally significant. German pilots had been trained to view aerial combat as individual contests of skill and courage. They accumulated personal victory score and received publicity for their achievement. This fighter pilot culture, while producing exceptional individual performances, could not adapt to the reality of mass production warfare. American bomber crews approached their missions with different mindset. They were components in a larger machine, each aircraft and crew representing a small fraction of overwhelming collective power. Radio communications crackled across the airfield as engines warmed up for departure. The complexity of coordinating 178 heavy bombers for simultaneous takeoff required unprecedented logistical precision. Each aircraft commander had received detailed timing schedule, navigation waypoints, and communication procedures. The formation would assemble over the Mediterranean, proceed north across occupied Yugoslavia, and approach the target from the west to achieve maximum surprise. The entire operation had been planned with the methodical thoroughness that characterized American military-industrial collaboration. Intelligence photographs revealed the scale of German defensive preparations around Ploiești. The refineries produced approximately 60% of Germany's natural oil supply, making them among the most heavily defended targets in occupied Europe. Flak towers surrounded the major installations in carefully calculated patterns designed to create overlapping fields of fire. Fighter bases at Mizil and Târgu could launch interceptors within minutes of receiving radar warning. The Romanian forces had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this type of attack. What the defenders had not prepared for was the mathematical reality of American production capacity. While German engineers calculated defensive requirements based on traditional concepts of air warfare, American planners approached the problem as an industrial equation. If 40% losses were acceptable to destroy 60% of German oil production, then the mission represented a favorable exchange ratio. More importantly, American factories could replace the lost aircraft within weeks, while German refineries would require months or years to rebuild. The human cost of this calculation weighed heavily on the aircrew preparing for departure. Each bomber carried 10 men, whose individual survival chances decreased significantly with every mile closer to the target. Yet these same men understood that their sacrifice served a larger purpose. They were instruments of American industrial democracy, carrying the collective will of a nation that had transformed its entire economy for war production. Their mission represented more than tactical objective. It embodied the fundamental conflict between democratic industrial capacity and authoritarian military. German intelligence had failed to grasp this essential distinction. Luftwaffe analysis focused on technical aircraft performance, pilot training standards, and tactical formations. They measured American capabilities using traditional military metrics that emphasized individual combat effectiveness. This analytical framework could not account for the revolutionary impact of mass production on military power. The Americans had essentially industrialized warfare, transforming military equipment from scarce, precious assets into abundant, expendable resources. The B-24 Liberator itself exemplified this transformation. Its design prioritized manufacturing efficiency over aerodynamic refinement. The aircraft's distinctive high-mounted wing and deep fuselage created more internal volume for fuel and bombs while simplifying production processes. Aluminum panels were sized to standard industrial specifications. Engines, propellers, and instruments used components common to other aircraft types, reducing manufacturing complexity and maintenance requirements. Every design decision reflected the priority of quantity production. This design philosophy extended to crew training programs. American aviation schools graduated bomber crew using standardized curricula and accelerated schedule. Where German pilot training emphasized individual skill development over extended periods, American programs focused on teamwork and procedure adherence. Crews learned to operate as integrated units rather than collections of individual specialists. This training approach matched the aircraft's design philosophy: systematic, efficient, and scalable to support mass production warfare. The strategic implications of this approach became apparent as engines roared to life across Benghazi air. Each aircraft represented not just 10 aircrew and 1 bomber, but the productive capacity of thousands of American workers in dozens of factories across the United States. The aluminum had been refined in Tennessee, using electricity generated by Tennessee Valley Authority dams. Steel components came from Pennsylvania mills, powered by Appalachian coal. Engines were assembled in Connecticut using precision manufacturing techniques developed by the automotive industry. Electronics originated from factories in New Jersey and California. The cumulative effect was a supply chain that could sustain combat operations at unprecedented scales. German war production, by contrast, remained constrained by traditional European industrial limitation. Raw material shortages, transportation bottlenecks, and skilled labor deficits limited aircraft production to levels that could not match American output. More significantly, German industrial philosophy emphasized technical superiority over quantity production. This approach produced excellent individual aircraft, but could not sustain the massive losses that modern air warfare imposed. Each German fighter shot down represented weeks or months of irreplaceable production effort. As the first B-24s began their takeoff role, the mathematical inevitability of American victory was already written in production statistics that German intelligence refused to believe. By the time these bombers reached their target, American factories would have completed production of 7 more B-24. By the end of August, monthly production would reach 400 aircraft. By year's end, the United States would be operating more heavy bombers than Germany had produced since 1939. This industrial supremacy would prove more decisive than any tactical innovation or strategic doctrine. The morning heat rose from the desert floor as 178 liberators formed up for the longest bombing mission attempted in the Mediterranean theater. Each aircraft carried the collective hopes and industrial might of a nation that had bet its future on mass production warfare. The mission to Ploiești would test not just the courage of individual aircrews, but the fundamental assumption that democratic industrial capacity could overcome authoritarian military power through sheer productive abundance. 1,800 miles to the northeast, German radar operators began reporting large formations of unidentified aircraft approaching from the south. The defenders of Ploiești prepared for battle, confident in their technical superiority and tactical preparations. They were about to discover that they faced not just another air raid, but the manifestation of American industrial democracy transformed into instruments of war. The laughter was about to stop. The German pilots stationed at Mizil and Tagșoru had heard rumors about American bombing raids, but few had encountered B-24 formations in significant numbers. Their intelligence briefings described the Liberator as an inferior aircraft, slower and less maneuverable than German fighters, vulnerable to determined attacks by experienced pilots. These assessments reflected the persistent German belief that individual skill and technical sophistication could overcome numerical disadvantages. The cultural arrogance that had characterized German military thinking since 1939 remained intact, despite mounting evidence of American industrial capacity. Oberfeldwebel Hans Müller, of Jagdgeschwader 27, epitomized this confidence. A veteran of campaigns in France, Britain, and Russia, he had accumulated 47 confirmed victories flying Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. His squadron mates called him Der Amerikaner Killer after shooting down several P-38 Lightning fighters over Sicily. When radar stations reported large formations approaching from the Mediterranean, Müller volunteered to lead the first interception mission. He expected to add several more American bombers to his victory tally before returning for lunch. The German defensive plan relied on proven tactics that had worked effectively against British bomber formations. Fighter squadrons would attack from multiple directions, focusing on lead aircraft to disrupt formation integrity. Once the bombers scattered, individual aircraft could be picked off by pursuing fighters, while heavy flak guns engaged any aircraft that maintained course toward the target. This approach had inflicted severe losses on Royal Air Force bomber formations throughout 1942 and early 1943. What German planners had not anticipated was the scale of American replacement capability. While Luftwaffe tactics focused on maximizing individual aircraft kills, American strategy accepted heavy losses as part of an acceptable exchange ratio. Each B-24 shot down would be replaced by multiple aircraft from production lines that operated continuously. German fighters, by contrast, became increasingly irreplaceable as the war progressed. This fundamental asymmetry would prove more decisive than any tactical superiority. Romanian Air Force pilots assigned to defend Ploiești shared German confidence but harbored private doubts about their equipment and training. Flying older Messerschmitt Bf-109E fighters with limited ammunition and fuel, they understood that their role was essentially sacrificial. Their orders emphasized disrupting American formations rather than achieving individual victories. This mission profile reflected the harsh mathematics of aerial warfare. Romanian pilots were expected to trade their lives for minor delays in American bombing accuracy. The psychological impact of mass formation flying had not been adequately considered in German planning. Luftwaffe pilots were accustomed to engaging small formations of 6 to 12 bombers, numbers that allowed individual attention to each target. The sight of 178 four-engine bombers approaching in disciplined formations created a visual and auditory experience unlike anything in previous European air warfare. The cumulative engine noise alone was sufficient to demoralize ground observers and disrupt radio communications. German anti-aircraft gun crews had trained extensively for defending against bombing attacks, but their preparations assumed traditional raid sizes of 20 to 30 aircraft. The massive ammunition expenditure required to engage nearly 200 bombers simultaneously exceeded planned supply level. More critically, the optical range-finding equipment and manual fire control systems could not effectively track multiple targets spread across several miles of airspace. The defenses that had proved adequate against British raids would be overwhelmed by American mass formation tactics. Intelligence assessments of American bombing accuracy had also proved optimistic from the German perspective. Early reports suggested that B-24 formations achieved poor precision when operating at high altitude under combat conditions. These evaluations failed to account for American innovations in bombardier training and equipment standardization. The Norden bombsight, when operated by properly trained crews flying in stable formations, could achieve accuracy levels that German planners considered impossible for mass-produced aircraft and rapidly trained crews. The systematic nature of American crew training represented another factor that German intelligence had consistently underestimated. While Luftwaffe pilot training emphasized individual initiative and improvisation, American programs focused on standardized procedures and coordinated teamwork. Bomber crews learned to function as integrated units where each member's actions supported collective mission effectiveness. This approach produced crews that maintained formation discipline and bombing accuracy, even under severe combat stress. Economic intelligence about American production capacity remained fragmentary and often dismissed as propaganda by German leadership. Oberkommando der Wehrmacht estimates placed total American bomber production at perhaps 500 aircraft per year, numbers that seemed consistent with traditional European industrial capability. The reality of 400 aircraft per month from a single factory complex exceeded German comprehension. This intelligence failure would prove catastrophic as American bomber formations appeared in numbers that made traditional defensive tactics obsolete. Cultural differences between American and German military philosophy created additional blind spots in defensive planning. German military tradition emphasized heroic individual actions and personal honor in combat. American military culture, by contrast, stressed systematic execution of coordinated operations designed to achieve specific strategic objectives. This difference manifested itself in tactical approaches that Germans found difficult to counter. American formations sacrificed individual aircraft performance for collective defensive firepower and bombing effectiveness. The industrial infrastructure supporting American bomber operations also exceeded German understanding. Each B-24 formation represented not just aircraft and crews, but an entire supply chain extending from raw material extraction through component manufacture to final assembly and delivery. This infrastructure could sustain combat operations at levels that consumed German defensive resources faster than they could be replaced. The mathematics of attrition warfare favored the side with superior production capacity, regardless of individual combat effectiveness. Technical intelligence about B-24 performance characteristics had proved incomplete and sometimes misleading. German test pilots who had examined captured aircraft focused on flight characteristics and defensive armament, areas where the Liberator showed clear limitations compared to German designs. They had not adequately evaluated the aircraft's role as a platform for mass production warfare. The B-24's design prioritized manufacturing efficiency and operational reliability over performance optimization, creating capabilities that traditional aircraft evaluation methods could not assess. Weather conditions over Romania on August 1, 1943, created additional complications for German defensive preparations. Cloud cover and atmospheric haze reduced visibility for both radar operators and fighter pilots. The American formation used these conditions to achieve greater surprise than German planners had considered possible. By the time visual contact was established, the bombers were already approaching their initial target area with minimal time for effective interception. The psychological preparation of German aircrew had emphasized technical superiority and individual combat skills while downplaying the implications of numerical disadvantage. Pilot briefings stressed the vulnerability of American bombers and the effectiveness of proven attack technique. This messaging created unrealistic expectations about achievable results when facing formations of unprecedented size. The reality of engaging nearly 200 heavy bombers simultaneously would prove far more challenging than any previous combat experience. Romanian ground observers reported the approaching formation as a cloud of metal that darkened the sky. This description captured the visual impact of mass formation bombing that German planners had never adequately considered. The sight of 178 B-24 Liberators in coordinated flight pattern created a psychological effect that transcended individual aircraft capabilities. The cumulative impression was of irresistible industrial power, made manifest in the form of aluminum and steel. Radio communications between German fighter squadrons revealed growing confusion as pilots attempted to coordinate attacks against a formation spread across several miles of airspace. Traditional interception tactics required concentration of defensive forces against specific targets, but the sheer size of the American formation made such concentration impossible. Pilots found themselves engaging individual bombers while losing sight of the overall tactical situation. This fragmentation of defensive efforts would prove exactly what American planners had intended. The moment of contact between American bombers and German defenses represented more than a tactical engagement. It embodied the fundamental conflict between two approaches to modern warfare: individual excellence versus industrial mass production. The outcome would be determined not by pilot skill or aircraft performance, but by the mathematics of replacement rates and production capacity. The Germans were about to discover that they faced not just another bombing raid, but the manifestation of democratic industrial power unleashed for total war. German intelligence had failed to grasp the revolutionary nature of American industrial mobilization. While European military thinking remained constrained by traditional concepts of limited resources and careful allocation, American planners had embraced abundance as a strategic weapon. The B-24 formations approaching Ploiești represented the first full-scale test of this philosophy. The results would reshape German understanding of modern warfare's fundamental nature. The morning sky over Romania was about to witness the collision between old-world military traditions and new-world industrial democracy. German pilots who expected to engage a manageable number of enemy aircraft would instead face a demonstration of productive capacity that exceeded their conceptual framework. The laughter that had characterized German assessments of American capabilities was about to give way to shocked recognition of a new form of warfare that rendered traditional military thinking obsolete. As the first German fighters climbed toward the approaching bomber formation, they carried with them the accumulated confidence of early war victories and technical superiority. Within hours, this confidence would be replaced by the sobering realization that they faced an enemy whose strength lay not in individual excellence, but in the systematic application of industrial democracy to military purposes. The mathematics of mass production were about to speak with a voice that would echo across the battlefields of Europe. The first Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters rose from Mizil airfield at 09:47 hours, their pilots confident in equipment that had dominated European skies since 1940. Oberfeldwebel Müller led a formation of 12 aircraft, climbing rapidly toward the reported bomber formation. His aircraft mounted a single 20mm cannon, firing through the propeller hub, and two wing-mounted 13mm machine guns, armament that had proved devastatingly effective against British bombers flying in small formations. The tactical doctrine was straightforward: high-speed attacks from the rear quarter, targeting engines and control surfaces to disable the bombers before their defensive gunners could respond effectively. What Müller encountered at 15,000 feet above the Danube River challenged every assumption about American bombing capability. The formation of B-24 Liberators stretched across several miles of airspace, flying in disciplined combat boxes that interlocked defensive fields of fire from nearly 1,800 machine guns. Each bomber carried 10 50 caliber Browning machine guns positioned to cover all approach angles. The cumulative firepower of the formation exceeded that of a light cruiser, delivered with precision that German intelligence had deemed impossible for mass-produced aircraft. The first attack came from directly ahead, with German fighters diving through the formation in a tactic that had worked against smaller British raids. Müller's aircraft closed rapidly on the lead bomber, a B-24J marked with distinctive nose art depicting a skeletal figure holding a bomb. At 300 meters range, he opened fire with all weapons, watching tracer rounds streak toward the target's cockpit. The American bomber continued flying straight and level, apparently undamaged, while return fire from multiple gun positions filled the air around the attacking fighter. Müller's wingman, Unteroffizier Klaus Weber, attempted to engage a bomber in the second element, but found his attack disrupted by defensive fire from 3 different aircraft. The interlocking fields of fire that American formation planners had developed created a defensive zone that no single fighter could penetrate without taking multiple hits. Weber's aircraft suffered damage to the engine cooling system and was forced to break off the attack after less than 5 seconds of engagement. The tactical reality was becoming clear. Traditional fighter attack methods were ineffective against formations of this size and firepower density. Romanian Air Force pilots flying from Târgu experienced similar difficulty. Captain Alexandru Popescu led 6 Messerschmitt Bf-109E fighters in a coordinated attack against the bomber formation's left flank, hoping to isolate individual aircraft for concentrated attack. The older Romanian fighters lacked the performance and armament of German aircraft, making their mission essentially suicidal. Popescu's aircraft was hit multiple times during the initial attack pass, forcing him to attempt an emergency landing in a wheat field near Brașov. His wingman was shot down outright, the pilot killed when defensive fire from a B-24 tail gunner ignited the fighter's fuel tank. The psychological impact of engaging such a large formation began affecting German pilot performance within minutes of initial contact. Luftwaffe training had emphasized individual combat skills and personal initiative, preparing pilots for engagements against comparable numbers of enemy aircraft. The sight of nearly 200 bombers flying in disciplined formation created a sensory overload that disrupted traditional decision-making process. Pilots found themselves fixated on individual targets, while losing awareness of the broader tactical situation and their own vulnerability to defensive fire. American bomber crews, by contrast, had trained extensively for exactly this type of engagement. Flight engineers monitored engine parameters, while navigators maintained precise positioning within the formation. Bombardiers prepared their equipment, while gunners scanned assigned sectors for attacking fighters. The systematic execution of assigned responsibilities allowed the formation to maintain cohesion and defensive effectiveness despite intensive fighter attacks. This coordination reflected the systematic training method that had produced thousands of aircrew using standardized procedures. The ammunition expenditure rate of German fighters quickly exceeded planned levels as pilots found themselves requiring multiple attack passes to achieve any visible damage against individual bombers. Traditional tactics called for short, precise bursts that conserved ammunition while maximizing damage effectiveness. The defensive firepower of large bomber formations made such precision impossible, forcing pilots to fire longer bursts at maximum range to avoid defensive fire. This approach depleted ammunition supplies within minutes, forcing aircraft to return to base for rearming, while the bomber formation continued toward its target. Radio communications between German fighters revealed growing frustration as pilots reported difficulty achieving decisive results against individual bombers. Aircraft that appeared heavily damaged continued flying in formation, protected by neighboring bombers that provided covering fire. The redundancy built into B-24 systems allowed aircraft to sustain battle damage that would have disabled traditional European designs. 4-engine configuration provided continued flight capability even with complete loss of one engine. Structural strength allowed operations with significant airframe damage. Multiple crew members ensured continued operations despite casualties. The German anti-aircraft defenses surrounding Ploiești had prepared for a conventional bombing attack involving 20 to 30 aircraft approaching at high altitude. The reality of 178 bombers approaching at medium altitude overwhelmed both optical tracking systems and manual fire control procedures. Flak gun crews found themselves engaging multiple targets simultaneously, dividing their fire effectiveness among numerous bombers rather than concentrating on individual aircraft. The mathematical reality was stark. German defenses had insufficient firepower to engage all attacking aircraft effectively. Flak gunner Otto Schneider, manning an 80-meter position overlooking the Romana refinery, later described the experience as like trying to shoot down a thunderstorm. The continuous engine noise of the approaching formation made voice communication impossible. Optical range-finding equipment designed for single-target engagement became useless when faced with aircraft spread across several miles of airspace. Manual plotting procedures broke down under the information overload of tracking dozens of simultaneous targets. The precision bombing techniques that American crews had perfected during training in the United States proved devastatingly effective against concentrated industrial targets. The Norden bomb sight, when operated by properly trained bombardiers flying in stable formation, achieved accuracy levels that German planners had considered theoretically impossible. The systematic destruction of refinery infrastructure required not individual acts of heroism, but coordinated execution of predetermined bombing patterns that distributed explosive force across maximum target area. Hauptmann Friedrich Weiss, commanding the fighter defense of Ploiești, attempted to coordinate a concentrated attack against the lead bomber formation, but found his radio communications disrupted by the combined engine noise of both bombers and fighters. Individual squadron leaders lost contact with their wingmen as aircraft maneuvered independently to avoid defensive fire. The carefully planned defensive coordination disintegrated into individual combats that favored neither side but prevented effective interception of the bombing mission. The first bombs fell on the Columbia Aquila refinery at 10:37 hours, creating explosions that were visible from Bucharest 50 miles away. American bombardiers had targeted critical infrastructure, including distillation towers, cracking units, and storage tank farms. The systematic destruction of interconnected industrial processes created cascading failures that multiplied the effectiveness of individual bomb hits. German engineers had concentrated production facilities to achieve maximum efficiency, but had inadvertently created vulnerabilities that precision bombing could exploit. Secondary explosions began within minutes as ruptured pipelines fed fires that spread throughout the refinery complex. Storage tanks containing hundreds of thousands of gallons of refined petroleum products detonated in sequence, creating a firestorm that consumed facilities across several square miles. The industrial infrastructure that had required years to construct was being destroyed in minutes by the systematic application of American bombing doctrine. German fighters attempting to pursue the bombers after the target attack found their efforts hampered by smoke columns that rose to 20,000 feet above the burning refineries. The visual obscuration made target acquisition difficult, while the thermal updrafts from the fires created turbulence that affected aircraft handling. Many pilots were forced to break off pursuit as their aircraft became uncontrollable in the superheated air above the burning. Romanian ground observers reported that the bomber formation maintained disciplined flight patterns even while under attack from both fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Individual aircraft that sustained battle damage were protected by neighboring bombers that adjusted their positions to provide covering fire. This tactical flexibility demonstrated the effectiveness of American training methods that emphasized mutual support and coordinated defensive procedures. The formation operated as an integrated unit rather than a collection of individual aircraft. The systematic destruction of Ploiești's refining capacity represented more than tactical success. It demonstrated the strategic effectiveness of industrial warfare conducted on American principle. Each attacking bomber had been produced by workers in factories across the United States, using materials extracted from mines and processed in mills that operated continuously to support the war effort. The mission represented the culmination of productive effort involving hundreds of thousands of Americans who would never see combat, but whose contributions made victory possible. Intelligence reports reaching Berlin described the attack as unprecedented in scale and effective. Previous bombing raids had caused localized damage that could be repaired within weeks or months. The systematic destruction of integrated industrial processes at Ploiești created damage that would require complete reconstruction of major facilities. More importantly, the demonstration of American capability to mount such operations suggested that similar attacks could be conducted against any target within range of Allied airbases. The human cost of the mission reflected the mathematical reality of attrition. Of the 178 B-24 liberators that had departed from bases in Libya, 54 failed to return. The loss rate of 30% represented acceptable casualties within American strategic planning parameters. More significantly, the lost aircraft would be replaced by new production within weeks, while the destroyed refinery capacity represented irreplaceable industrial infrastructure that had required years to develop. German pilot casualties during the engagement totaled 47 aircraft destroyed or damaged, with 31 pilots killed or wounded. These losses represented irreplaceable training investments and combat experience that German aviation could not afford to lose. The exchange ratio favored American forces not because of superior individual performance, but because of superior replacement capability. Each German pilot lost represented months of training that could not be duplicated, while American aircrew losses could be replaced by ongoing training programs. The psychological impact of the Ploiești raid extended far beyond immediate tactical results. German military leaders who had dismissed American production claims as propaganda were forced to confront evidence of industrial capacity that exceeded their analytical framework. The ability to mount operations involving nearly 200 heavy bombers suggested American capabilities that rendered traditional European concepts of limited warfare obsolete. Romanian civilians who witnessed the attack described the sound of the formation as thunder that never stopped. The psychological effect of such massive displays of air power created demoralization that extended far beyond immediate target area. Reports of American bombing capabilities spread throughout occupied Europe, undermining confidence in German defensive preparations and creating expectations of inevitable defeat that would prove strategically significant. The technical lessons learned from the Ploiești engagement would influence both American and German tactical development for the remainder of the war. American planners recognized that mass formation tactics could overwhelm defensive systems designed for smaller raids, but required exceptional coordination and training to execute effectively. German defenders understood that traditional interception methods were inadequate against formations of such size and began developing new tactics, emphasizing concentrated attacks by large fighter formations. Manufacturing statistics compiled after the raid revealed the mathematical foundation of American strategic success. While German aircraft production struggled to replace combat losses, American factories delivered new bombers at rates that sustained continuous operations despite heavy casualties. The Ford Willow Run plant alone produced more B-24 Liberators in August 1943 than Germany manufactured heavy bombers during the entire year. This productive supremacy ensured that tactical defeats could be absorbed while maintaining strategic momentum. The burning oil fires of Ploiești continued for 3 weeks after the attack, visible from aircraft flying at high altitude over the Balkan. The petroleum smoke that darkened Romanian skies served as a monument to industrial warfare, conducted on scales that previous military history had never contemplated. The mathematics of mass production had spoken with a voice that echoed across continents, announcing the emergence of warfare transformed by democratic industrial capacity. The strategic implications of the Ploiești raid resonated through German military planning for months afterward. Intelligence assessments were revised to account for American capabilities that had exceeded all previous estimates. Defensive preparations throughout occupied Europe were reorganized to address the threat of large-scale bombing operations that traditional methods could not counter effectively. The fundamental assumptions underlying German military strategy required complete reconsideration in light of demonstrated American industrial power. For the surviving American aircrew who participated in the mission, the experience represented validation of training methods and equipment that had been developed through systematic analysis of combat requirements. The B-24 Liberator had proved its effectiveness as a platform for mass production warfare, demonstrating that properly coordinated formations of such aircraft could achieve strategic objectives despite individual performance limitations. The human courage required to execute such missions was matched by the industrial courage required to commit national resources to their support. The laughter that had characterized German assessments of American military capabilities had been replaced by sober recognition of industrial democracy's power when mobilized for total war. The mathematical realities of production capacity and replacement rates had proved more decisive than individual combat skills or technical sophistication. The sky above Ploiești had witnessed the emergence of a new form of warfare that would determine the conflict's ultimate outcome through systematic application of productive abundance rather than traditional military excellence. The fires of August 1943 illuminated more than burning petroleum. They revealed the transformation of warfare itself through the systematic application of American industrial methods to military purposes. The B-24 formations that had darkened Romanian skies carried with them the productive power of a democratic society unleashed for the preservation of freedom. The thunder of their engines announced that tyranny, regardless of its tactical brilliance or technical sophistication, could not withstand the sustained pressure of free peoples organized for war production on unprecedented scales. The lessons learned at Ploiești would echo through the remaining years of the war, as American bomber formations appeared over targets throughout occupied Europe. Each mission would demonstrate anew the mathematical inevitability of democratic victory through industrial supremacy. The German pilots who had initially laughed at American bombers would face the sobering reality that they confronted not individual aircraft, but the manifestation of an entire nation's productive capacity transformed into instruments of liberation. The aftermath of the Ploiești raid reverberated through the highest levels of German military leadership, with implications that extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. Oberkommando der Wehrmacht intelligence assessments, previously dismissive of American industrial claims, were hastily revised as reconnaissance flights confirmed the complete destruction of Romania's primary refining facilities. General Oberst Hans Jeschonek, chief of the Luftwaffe General Staff, demanded detailed analysis of how nearly 200 American heavy bombers had penetrated German defensive systems that had been considered impregnable. The mathematical reality of the engagement proved more disturbing to German planners than the immediate tactical defeat. Intelligence officers calculated that American forces had committed approximately 1,800 aircrew and nearly 200 aircraft to destroy industrial facilities that represented years of construction and billions of Reichsmarks in investment. The exchange ratio was devastating from a strategic perspective. American losses could be replaced within weeks through ongoing production programs, while Romanian refining capacity would require complete reconstruction using materials and expertise that were increasingly unavailable. Production statistics gathered by German industrial intelligence painted an even more troubling picture. The Ford Willow Run facility alone was producing B-24 Liberators at rates that exceeded total German heavy bomber production by factors of 10 to 1. Consolidated Aircraft's San Diego plant contributed additional aircraft, while Douglas, Boeing, and other manufacturers provided supporting production. The cumulative American bomber production rate approached levels that German analysts had previously considered physically impossible, given traditional manufacturing limitations. Reichsmarshal Göring's reaction to the Ploiești intelligence reports reflected the cognitive dissonance that characterized German leadership throughout the period. Having publicly dismissed American production claims as propaganda, he now faced documented evidence of capabilities that exceeded his analytical framework. His response was to demand verification of the intelligence rather than accept implications that would require fundamental revision of German strategic planning. This denial would prove characteristic of German decision-making processes that could not adapt to mathematical reality. The psychological impact on German aircrew was equally significant and potentially more damaging to long-term defensive capability. Pilot reports describing formations of unprecedented size created morale problems that traditional military could not address effectively. Experienced pilots, who had dominated European skies since 1940, found themselves questioning their ability to influence the course of aerial warfare when facing American formations that rendered individual skill irrelevant through sheer numerical superiority. Technical analysis of captured B-24 components revealed American manufacturing sophistication that German engineers had not anticipated. The systematic standardization of parts and assembly procedures enabled production volumes that traditional European craftsmanship methods could never achieve. More troubling was the discovery that American aircraft incorporated design features specifically intended to facilitate mass production rather than optimize individual performance. This philosophy represented a fundamental departure from German engineering principles that emphasized technical excellence over quantity production. Economic intelligence about American productive capacity forced German planners to confront uncomfortable realities about the strategic balance. While German industry struggled to maintain aircraft production levels of 50 to 70 heavy bombers per month, American factories were delivering 400 to 500 aircraft monthly, with projections reaching even higher levels. The mathematics of attrition warfare clearly favored the side with superior replacement capability, regardless of individual combat effectiveness or tactical superiority. Romanian officials responsible for petroleum production provided detailed damage assessments that highlighted the systematic nature of American bombing doctrine. Rather than random destruction, the attack had targeted specific industrial processes in sequences that maximized cascading failures throughout the refinery complex. This precision suggested intelligence gathering and mission planning capabilities that exceeded previous estimates of American operational sophistication. The coordination required to execute such complex operations with formations of nearly 200 aircraft indicated systematic military competence that traditional German assessments had underestimated. Luftwaffe fighter commanders, requesting additional aircraft to replace combat losses, were informed that replacement deliveries would be delayed indefinitely due to production bottlenecks and material shortages. The industrial infrastructure supporting German aviation had been optimized for limited production runs of technically sophisticated aircraft, rather than mass production of standardized designs. This approach, while producing excellent individual aircraft, could not sustain the attrition rates that American bombing operations imposed on defensive forces. The ripple effects of petroleum shortages caused by Ploiești's destruction began manifesting themselves within weeks of the attack. German panzer divisions operating on the Eastern Front reported fuel rationing that limited operational mobility. Luftwaffe squadrons throughout Europe received reduced fuel allocations that curtailed training flights and patrol operations. The synthetic fuel plants in Germany could not compensate for the loss of Romanian production, creating systemic shortages that affected all aspects of military operations. Strategic planning documents circulated within the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht reflected growing recognition that German defensive strategy required fundamental revision. The assumption that limited air attacks could be countered through concentrated defensive preparations was no longer viable when facing American formations of unprecedented size. New defensive concepts emphasized depth and redundancy rather than concentrated firepower, acknowledging that some attacking aircraft would inevitably reach their targets regardless of defensive measures. American intelligence gathering during the Ploiești mission provided detailed assessment of German defensive capabilities that would influence subsequent bombing operations. Aircrew debriefings revealed weaknesses in German fighter tactics when engaging large formations, information that bombing doctrine specialists incorporated into formation planning and defensive procedure. The systematic analysis of combat results enabled continuous improvement in American operational effectiveness, while German forces struggled to adapt to warfare conducted on scales they had never anticipated. The cultural shock experienced by German military personnel extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to fundamental questions about the nature of modern warfare. Traditional European military thinking emphasized individual excellence and technical sophistication as decisive factors in combat effectiveness. The American approach, which prioritized systematic coordination and industrial mass production over individual performance, challenged basic assumptions about military competence that had shaped German officer education for generations. Prisoner interrogation reports from captured German aircrew revealed demoralization that exceeded normal combat stress reactions. Experienced pilots described feelings of helplessness when engaging formations that absorbed individual attacks without significant degradation of overall effectiveness. The psychological impact of facing systematic American operations conducted with apparent industrial abundance created defeatist attitudes that traditional military discipline could not counter effectively. Intelligence assessments reaching Hitler's headquarters painted an increasingly grim picture of strategic prospect that senior leadership was reluctant to acknowledge. The mathematical reality of American production supremacy suggested that German forces would face escalating pressure from bombing operations that could not be countered through traditional defensive methods. More disturbing was the recognition that American industrial capacity was still expanding, with new production facilities entering operation monthly, while German capabilities declined due to material shortages and strategic bombing. Romanian government officials responsible for petroleum policy requested immediate German assistance in reconstructing Ploiești's refining capacity, but received responses indicating that necessary materials and expertise were unavailable due to competing military. The industrial resources required to rebuild destroyed facilities exceeded German spare capacity, while American bombing operations threatened additional attacks against any reconstruction effort. The mathematical reality was that destruction proceeded faster than reconstruction when facing systematic bombing campaigns. Technical intelligence about American bomber defensive systems revealed innovations that German fighter tactics had not anticipated. The interlocking fields of fire created by properly coordinated B-24 formations provided defensive coverage that individual fighters could not penetrate without sustaining prohibitive casualties. More significantly, American gunners had received systematic training in coordinated defensive procedures that maximized the effectiveness of collective firepower. This systematic approach to crew training reflected the same industrial methodology that enabled mass aircraft production. The logistics requirements for mounting operations, involving nearly 200 heavy bombers, demonstrated American organizational capabilities that exceeded German estimates of Allied competence. The coordination of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and maintenance personnel required to support such missions indicated systematic planning and resource allocation that traditional military organizations could not achieve. American military effectiveness reflected not just industrial capacity, but systematic management methods adapted from civilian industry. Economic analysis of American war production revealed industrial mobilization on scales that German planners had considered impossible within democratic political systems. The conversion of automotive factories to aircraft production, exemplified by Ford's Willow Run facility, demonstrated flexibility and efficiency that centralized German planning could not match. More troubling was evidence that American production was still accelerating, with monthly output increases that suggested peak capacity had not yet been reached. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate military considerations to fundamental questions about the viability of German war aim. If American forces could mount operations like Ploiești routinely, then no German industrial facility or military installation could be considered secure from attack. The defensive requirements for protecting all potential targets would exceed German military capacity. Even if other combat operations were suspended entirely, the mathematical reality suggested that systematic American bombing could cripple German war production, regardless of tactical defensive. Communication intercepts between American Air Force units revealed planning for additional large-scale bombing operations that would dwarf the Ploiești attack in size and scope. References to thousand-bomber raids and round-the-clock operations suggested American capabilities that would overwhelm German defensive systems through sheer volume rather than tactical sophistication. The industrial capacity to sustain such operations indicated strategic planning horizons that extended far beyond immediate tactical considerations. German industrial planners requesting increased aircraft production were informed that aluminum shortages and component bottlenecks made significant expansion impossible without reducing other military production priorities. The resource constraints that limited German industrial capacity could not be resolved through management efficiency or technical innovation when facing systematic attacks against supply sources and transportation networks. American strategy appeared designed to exploit these inherent limitations rather than engage in direct military confrontation. Training programs for Luftwaffe replacement pilots were accelerated to address increasing casualty rates, but shortened training periods produced aircrew with reduced combat effectiveness when facing experienced American formations. The systematic nature of American crew training, which emphasized standardized procedures and coordinated teamwork, proved more effective than traditional German methods that prioritized individual skill development. This training philosophy reflected the same systematic approach that enabled mass production warfare. Propaganda efforts to maintain civilian morale increasingly emphasized German technical superiority and individual heroism, while avoiding discussion of strategic implications that senior leadership understood but could not acknowledge publicly. The cognitive dissonance between public messaging and private strategic assessments created policy paralysis that prevented effective adaptation to mathematical realities. German decision-making processes had become trapped by ideological commitments that reality no longer supported. Intelligence reports describing American industrial expansion included disturbing information about production planning that extended into 1945 and beyond. American aircraft manufacturers were constructing additional facilities and expanding existing plants based on projected requirements that assumed continued large-scale operations for years. This long-term planning horizon contrasted sharply with German focus on immediate tactical problems and suggested American confidence in ultimate victory through industrial attrition. The systematic destruction of European industrial capacity through precision bombing represented a form of warfare that German military doctrine had not anticipated or prepared to counter. Traditional concepts of decisive battle and territorial conquest became irrelevant when facing an enemy whose strategy emphasized systematic degradation of productive capacity rather than direct military confrontation. American approach to warfare reflected industrial methodology applied to military purposes with devastating effectiveness. Romanian officials responsible for civil defense reported civilian demoralization that exceeded normal bombing effects due to the unprecedented scale and precision of the American attack. The demonstration of capability to mount such operations created expectations of additional attacks that disrupted normal economic activity and social order. The psychological impact of systematic bombing extended far beyond immediate target areas to affect entire populations who recognized their vulnerability to American industrial power. Captured documents from American bomber crews revealed mission planning sophistication that indicated systematic intelligence gathering and operational coordination. The precision with which specific industrial targets had been identified and prioritized suggested analytical capabilities that exceeded German estimates of Allied competence. More disturbing was evidence that the Ploiești attack represented just one element in comprehensive strategic planning that encompassed targets throughout occupied Europe. German aviation fuel production statistics revealed the strategic impact of losing Romanian petroleum supplies exceeded immediate refining capacity. The transportation networks and storage facilities associated with Ploiești represented integrated infrastructure that could not be quickly replaced, even if refining capacity were restored. American targeting doctrine appeared designed to create systemic failures that multiplied the effectiveness of individual bombing missions through cascading effects throughout the German war economy. Economic intelligence about American resource allocation revealed industrial mobilization that prioritized military production over civilian consumption to degrees that German analysts had considered impossible within democratic political systems. The systematic conversion of American industry for war production exceeded German mobilization levels while maintaining higher civilian living standards. This combination of military effectiveness and political sustainability suggested strategic advantages that authoritarian systems could not match. The mathematical inevitability of American victory through industrial attrition became apparent to German planners who possessed accurate intelligence about relative production capabilities. American bomber production alone exceeded total German aircraft manufacturing, while American industrial capacity continued expanding through new facilities and improved efficiency. The strategic balance had shifted irreversibly in favor of democratic industrial democracy, despite German tactical competence and technical sophistication. Communication intercepts revealed American confidence in their ability to sustain large-scale bombing operations indefinitely, while German forces struggled to maintain defensive capabilities against increasing attack frequencies. The systematic nature of American operational planning contrasted sharply with German reactive responses that consumed resources faster than replaced. Industrial warfare favored the side with superior productive capacity, regardless of individual combat effectiveness. The burning refineries of Ploiești served as monuments to the transformation of warfare through systematic application of democratic industrial capacity. The fires that continued for weeks after the attack illuminated the mathematical reality that would determine the war's outcome. Free societies organized for total war production could generate military power that authoritarian regimes could not match despite technical excellence or tactical innovation. The laughter that had characterized German assessments of American capabilities had been permanently silenced by the thunder of engines carrying democratic resolve made manifest in aluminum and steel. Intelligence assessments compiled in Berlin during September 1943 reflected growing recognition that American bombing capabilities represented fundamental challenges to German strategic planning rather than temporary tactical problems. The systematic nature of American operations suggested long-term strategic thinking that extended far beyond immediate military objectives to encompass comprehensive degradation of German war-making capacity. Traditional military responses based on defensive concentration and tactical countermeasures were proving inadequate against systematic industrial warfare. The psychological transformation of German aircrew who survived encounters with large American bomber formations created training and morale problems that traditional military discipline could not address effectively. Experienced pilots reported feelings of individual insignificance when facing formations that absorbed personal combat efforts without apparent effect. The collective defensive power of coordinated American bombers rendered traditional fighter pilot tactics ineffective. while exposing individual aircraft to concentrated defensive fire. Romanian petroleum engineers assessing damage at Ploiești provided technical analysis that revealed the systematic precision of American targeting doctrine. Rather than random destruction, the bombing had targeted specific industrial processes in sequences that maximized cascading failures throughout integrated refining systems. The coordination required to achieve such precision with formations of nearly 200 aircraft indicated planning sophistication that exceeded previous German estimates of Allied operational competence. Economic analysis of American war production revealed industrial capacity that continued expanding despite already unprecedented output levels. New aircraft factories entered production monthly, while existing facilities increased efficiency through improved manufacturing techniques. The systematic application of American industrial methodology to military production created capabilities that German centralized planning could not match even with unlimited resources and totalitarian control. Strategic planning documents circulated within German military headquarters acknowledged that defensive strategies designed for traditional European warfare were obsolete when facing American industrial democracy mobilized for total war. The mathematical reality of replacement rates and production capacity favored democratic systems that could sustain prolonged attrition while maintaining technological innovation and operational flexibility. Authoritarian efficiency proved inferior to democratic abundance when both systems operated at maximum capability. Training programs for German replacement aircrew were modified to address the reality of engaging large American formations, but abbreviated instruction periods could not prepare pilots for psychological challenges that exceeded technical training scope. The systematic coordination that characterized American bomber operations created combat environments that traditional European military education had never contemplated. Individual heroism and technical skill became irrelevant when facing coordinated mass attacks by properly trained formation. Intelligence reports describing American production planning revealed industrial mobilization that assumed continued large-scale operations extending years into the future. This long-term strategic perspective contrasted sharply with German focus on immediate tactical problems and suggested American confidence in ultimate victory through systematic application of productive superiority. Democratic industrial planning appeared more effective than authoritarian command systems when operating under wartime conditions. The ripple effects of petroleum shortages caused by Ploiești's destruction created operational limitations throughout German military forces that compounded other resource constraints. Reduced fuel allocations affected training programs, patrol operations, and tactical mobility, while synthetic fuel production could not compensate for lost Romanian capacity. American strategic targeting appeared designed to create multiple simultaneous pressures that exceeded German adaptive capacity. Communication intercepts between American military units revealed operational planning that encompassed targets throughout occupied Europe with systematic prioritization based on industrial significance and strategic impact. The coordination required to execute such comprehensive targeting indicated analytical capabilities and organizational competence that traditional German military thinking had not anticipated from democratic military systems. American strategic planning reflected industrial methodology applied to warfare with devastating effectiveness. Prisoner interrogation reports from captured American aircrew revealed training programs that emphasized systematic coordination and standardized procedures over individual initiative and improvisation. This educational philosophy produced crews capable of executing complex operations under severe combat stress while maintaining formation discipline and mission effectiveness. The systematic nature of American training methods reflected the same industrial approach that enabled mass production warfare. German industrial planners requesting increased aviation fuel production were informed that synthetic fuel capacity had reached maximum output, while raw material shortages prevented facility expansion. The resource constraints limiting German industrial capability could not be resolved through efficiency improvements when facing systematic attacks against supply sources and transportation infrastructure. American strategy exploited inherent limitations in centralized economic systems that democratic abundance could overcome. Economic intelligence about American resource allocation revealed industrial mobilization that maintained civilian living standards while supporting unprecedented military production levels. This combination of military effectiveness and political sustainability exceeded German estimates of democratic system capability under wartime stress. Authoritarian regimes that prioritized military production over civilian welfare proved less effective at total war than democratic societies that achieved both objectives simultaneously. Technical analysis of American bombing accuracy revealed precision that German planners had considered impossible for mass-produced air operated by rapidly trained crews. The systematic training program and standardized equipment that enabled such accuracy reflected industrial methodology applied to military operations with results that exceeded traditional military competence. Democratic systematic approaches proved superior to authoritarian individual excellence when applied systematically. The strategic implications of American bombing capability extended beyond immediate military considerations to fundamental questions about the viability of continued resistance. If democratic industrial capacity could sustain operations like Ploiești indefinitely while German replacement capability declined, then mathematical inevitability favored Allied victory regardless of tactical defensive successes. The strategic balance had shifted irreversibly through systematic application of productive abundance. Propaganda efforts to maintain military morale increasingly emphasized German technical superiority, while avoiding discussion of strategic implications that senior leadership understood but could not acknowledge without undermining political authority. The cognitive dissonance between public messaging and private strategic assessments prevented effective policy adaptation to mathematical realities that contradicted ideological commitments. German decision-making processes had become paralyzed by commitments that reality no longer supported. Intelligence assessments reaching Hitler's headquarters provided increasingly accurate information about American capabilities, while political leadership remained unwilling to accept implications that would require fundamental strategic revision. The mathematical reality of industrial warfare favored democratic abundance over authoritarian efficiency, but acknowledgement of this reality would undermine the ideological foundations of the regime. Strategic paralysis resulted from inability to adapt to circumstances that contradicted fundamental beliefs. Romanian government officials responsible for reconstruction planning received German responses indicating that materials and expertise required to rebuild Ploiești were unavailable due to competing military priorities and resource shortage. The systematic nature of American bombing suggested that reconstruction efforts would face additional attacks that rendered investment ineffective. Mathematical analysis indicated that destruction proceeded faster than reconstruction when facing systematic bombing campaigns supported by unlimited productive capacity. The demonstration of American capability to mount precision bombing operations involving nearly 200 heavy bombers created expectations of additional attacks throughout occupied Europe that disrupted normal economic activity and social order. Civilian populations who witnessed such displays of industrial power recognized their vulnerability to systematic destruction that traditional defensive measures could not prevent. Psychological warfare through demonstration of overwhelming capability proved as effective as actual bombing in degrading enemy morale. Communication intercepts revealed American planning for escalated bombing operations that would exceed Ploiești in scale and frequency, while German defensive capabilities declined due to increasing casualty rates and resource constraints. The systematic nature of American operational planning suggested strategic thinking that encompassed comprehensive degradation of German war-making capacity through sustained attrition rather than decisive battle. Industrial warfare favored sustained pressure over tactical brilliance. The mathematical foundation of American strategic success became apparent through production statistics that revealed democratic industrial mobilization exceeding authoritarian achievements despite supposedly superior centralized planning and totalitarian control. Free societies organized for total war demonstrated productive capabilities that exceeded German estimates of democratic system potential under stress. The systematic application of American industrial methodology to military purposes created strategic advantages that traditional military thinking could not counter. Training modifications implemented by Luftwaffe commands acknowledged that traditional fighter tactics were ineffective against large American bomber formations, but could not develop alternative approaches that addressed fundamental numerical disadvantages. The systematic defensive coordination that characterized American bomber operations exceeded individual combat skills, regardless of pilot experience or aircraft performance. Collective American capabilities rendered individual German excellence strategically irrelevant. Economic analysis revealed that American war production represented only partial mobilization of democratic industrial capacity, while German systems operated at maximum potential, with declining effectiveness due to resource constraints and systematic bombing. The mathematical implications suggested that American capabilities would continue expanding while German capacity contracted under sustained pressure. Strategic initiative had shifted irreversibly to democratic forces through systematic application of productive abundance. The fires that continued burning at Ploiești 3 weeks after the attack served as visible monuments to the power of democratic industrial capacity mobilized for systematic warfare. The petroleum smoke that darkened Romanian skies announced the emergence of warfare transformed by mathematical realities that traditional military thinking could not comprehend. The thunder of American engines had spoken with authority that silenced forever the laughter that had characterized enemy assessments of democratic military potential. German military personnel who had survived encounters with American bomber formations carried psychological wounds that traditional treatment could not heal because they reflected accurate assessment of strategic reality rather than temporary combat stress. The systematic nature of American operations created recognition that individual courage and skill were insufficient when facing coordinated mass attacks, supported by unlimited replacement capacity. Personal heroism became meaningless when confronting mathematical inevitability. Intelligence reports compiled throughout autumn 1943 documented American capabilities that exceeded German analytical frameworks, while political leadership remained committed to ideological positions that mathematical reality contradicted. The cognitive dissonance between accurate intelligence and ideological requirements created policy paralysis that prevented effective adaptation to changing strategic circumstances. German decision-making processes had become trapped by commitments that empirical evidence no longer supported. The strategic transformation witnessed above Ploiești represented more than tactical evolution. It embodied the fundamental shift from traditional military competition to industrial warfare where productive capacity determined outcomes more decisively than combat skill or technical sophistication. Democratic societies organized for total war had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded authoritarian achievements despite supposedly inferior centralized control and systematic organization. The mathematics of mass production had spoken with voices that echoed across continents. Romanian civilians who witnessed the systematic destruction of their most vital industrial infrastructure recognized that they faced forces beyond their comprehension or resistance. The precision and scale of American operations indicated capabilities that could be applied systematically throughout occupied Europe with mathematical certainty. Traditional concepts of defensive preparation and civilian protection became obsolete when facing industrial warfare conducted by democratic abundance. The laughter that had characterized German assessments of American military potential had been replaced by sober recognition that democratic industrial capacity represented strategic challenges that traditional military responses could not address effectively. The systematic nature of American operations reflected long-term strategic planning that encompassed comprehensive degradation of enemy capabilities through sustained attrition rather than decisive tactical engagement. Mathematical inevitability had replaced individual excellence as the determining factor in modern warfare. The thunder above Ploiești had announced the emergence of warfare transformed by democratic industrial democracy applied systematically to military purposes. The B-24 formations that darkened Romanian skies carried with them the collective will of free people organized for total war production on scales that authoritarian regimes could not match despite technical sophistication and individual excellence. The mathematical reality of productive abundance had spoken with authority that would determine the conflict's ultimate outcome through systematic application of democratic resolve made manifest in aluminum and steel. History isn't just written, it's remembered through those who still care to listen. What story should we tell next? Subscribe to keep their memory alive. Your feedback is incredibly valuable and helps me keep making better content for you.